I want to start this video with a bit of personal history regarding this game, and I'm curious to see if anybody has the same kind of memory in regards to it. I was a kid when Mortal Kombat Trilogy was released. I was up to date on the next-gen systems for the time, which was the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1. MK Trilogy released in 1996. Now, I'm fairly certain that I didn't play this game the same year that it came out, but when I finally discovered its existence in a magazine and found it in a local store, I was super hype for one reason. If you're like me, which I'm pretty sure could be a fair few of you, and you were a Mortal Kombat fan growing up in the 90s that didn't have access to anything that resembles an arcade, your only way to experience Mortal Kombat was the 16-bit ports that existed on Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Now, I'm not bashing those games at all. They were actually very solid ports of games like Ultimate MK3, but you didn't get the full arcade experience due to obvious hardware limitations. Now, here comes PlayStation 1 Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which has crisp graphics, very similar to arcade quality sound effects and music, responsive controls. As a kid, this seemed like the perfect way to experience classic Mortal Kombat on console that we'd all been waiting for. Although it was definitely met with less than desirable reviews at the time from official magazines, years later, the game is held in such high esteem amongst the MK fanbase because we could finally play what really felt like an authentic Mortal Kombat experience that gathered as much from all the classic games as it could and mashed them all together. You know the drill by now though, don't you? This video series dives into the hardcore gameplay mechanics and competitive angle that this game brought to the table, and boy is there a lot to go over here. New characters, new moves, and a wide variety of console differences that most fans would never have realized. This is episode 5 of the MK Meta, and this is Mortal Kombat Trilogy. Before we get started, I recommend highly that you watch my MK Meta on Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 before this video. I'll be referring to that game a lot as Trilogy is taken directly from it mechanically. So for your benefit, it probably makes more sense that you understand Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 before Trilogy because they're so similar. For the sake of clarity, I want to mention that most of this video is going to be captured using the PlayStation 1 version of Trilogy. It's not only a little bit easier to work with, recording-wise, but it was the version that I personally grew up with and have the most to talk about. I think that's the case for a few people though. Trilogy was released on other systems as well, such as the Sega Saturn and PC, but I'm touching on N64 and PlayStation 1 respectively, as they, by all accounts, were the main versions that people played. Mortal Kombat Trilogy was pure combat and nothing else. Unlike other MK games that had extra modes and things outside of core gameplay to focus on, Trilogy had Mortal Kombat, which was the arcade mode and a variety of difficulties, 2 vs 2 combat, where players select 2 characters each and you have to defeat both characters in a round, and 8-player combat, a best of 1 round single elimination tournament mode that decides a winner at the very end. Players would select a character each and simply pass the controllers around each time. I'm sure some of you will be familiar that, yes, this is almost identical to Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, of which MK Trilogy clearly took a lot of influence from. Before I dive into the nitty-gritty, it's important to cover the design aspect of Trilogy. Although it looks like a reskin of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, there are some differences and some new additions to the game's system. I'm not going to cover mechanics or roster just yet, I want to get the basics out of the way first. Be prepared, I really am going to reference Ultimate MK3 a lot here. The first thing many noticed was that the music is a little bit different. It's mostly a combination of MK2 and UMK3 soundtracks, but a lot of the tracks are both lower in pitch and slower in tempo. Stages would combine all 4 of the classic MK titles, the term 4 being used if you treat MK3 and UMK3 as separate games, because Ultimate MK3 had new stages. Unlike base arcade Ultimate MK3, Trilogy would see the return of a new finishing move, the Brutality. Brutalities made their first appearance in the 16-bit home ports of Ultimate MK3, but as always with PS1 Trilogy, we get a more true-to-arcade look at what a brutality was always supposed to look like. A giant combo that's different for each character, ending in a big finale. And of course, that sweet, sweet sound effect.
Brutality.
Brutalities were a bit tricky to learn. It's essentially one big dialer combo, and the rhythm of inputting it doesn't always feel right. You need to figure out the right timing for each character, and I could never do these as a kid. I know it seems a little bit weird having an entire section on the options menu, right? But hear me out on this one. Trilogy featured some options that a player could toggle to really speed up the process of playing a match. Remember, this was the PS1 we're talking about, a console notorious for its load time. If you didn't change any of these settings, players would have to wait a lot longer than necessary to get into games, a pain in the backside if you're just trying to find or grind a long set. Character select can be set to fast, where the sprites are removed from the screen, resulting in a faster selection. Versus screen can be turned off, removing the versus graphic that plays after you've selected your characters. The buy-in screen can be turned off too, skipping the option to game over and taking you straight back to the main menu. Match Recycle is an instant match restart tool. Set the amount of times you'd like the game to restart after ending, and you're on your way. Much better for long sets for sure. Blood has the option to be disabled, which does exactly what you'd expect. And now, Shang Tsung's morphs. Shang Tsung in Ultimate MK3 has the ability to morph on command. He can basically become any character that he wants to. In MK Trilogy, and thanks to the PlayStation's load time problem, you have a few different options over Shang's morph possibilities. All morphs lets you stay true to form and become anyone that you want using specific commands. Only this happens. There is a solution to this though, because you can turn on a setting called Limited Morphs. With this selected, you can manually pick which morphs that you want on the character select screen. It removes the load time, but it means that you can only morph into those set characters. Bear in mind that you can't choose more than one of the same base model. Only one male ninja, only one female ninja, or cyber ninja. I'm going to assume it's something to do with the load time, that you can't mix and match Reptile with Ermac, for instance. Perhaps it would cause a crash or something. Additionally, if both players choose Shang Tsung, player 1 still gets to pick 2 morphs, but player 2 only gets to pick 1. Both players can morph into all 3 characters though, so I think the idea was that Shang players would maybe agree to the 3 morphs, or maybe you both get 1 each and mutually decide on the 3rd. I don't know. If you both wanted to play a ninja, and one of you got there first, tough luck to the one who didn't, because you now don't have the chance. Additionally, in 2v2, Shang only gets access to 1 morph, and yes, that also counts if both players pick Shang Tsung. So you'd have to mutually agree on the 1 pick? That's kind of awkward. The final option is no morphs, like you straight off turn his ability off to morph into anyone. Holding block, run, and up in the options menu will actually unlock a secret options menu that has extra selections. 1-button fatalities lets you perform every fatality regardless of requirement with a touch of 1 button. Normal boss damage reverts some of the damage to what it should be, making them a bit more manageable to fight. Low damage and health regeneration is essentially a way a player can makeshift a training mode. It's basically infinite health, so with 2 pads, you can actually lab stuff. Instant Aggressor immediately fills the Aggressor bar with 1 single hit. Don't worry, we'll get into that in a sec. This is a slight change of format from my usual videos because Trilogy lends itself so heavily from Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, I'm not going to do my usual basics and then meta sections. Like I said at the start, I really recommend that you check out my very first MK meta which focused on UMK3 for a detailed breakdown of how the game was approached at high level, because MK Trilogy is played almost identically to it. But since you're here, here's a quick breakdown before I go into the Trilogy specific changes and additions. The 4 attack buttons were split between high punch, high kick, and low kick, with a block button on top. Run button allowed players to be extremely aggressive, with the act of running into the opponent with a jab and either grabbing them or low crushing them with a kick-based combo string if they try to interrupt you, shaping what we know as run jab pressure. Combos were extensive thanks to the dialer combo system, and characters that gained great damage from their kick-based combo strings usually being considered extremely competitively viable. If you got damage from a low crush, you were seen as pretty damn good. The stamina bar is found underneath the health bars and is depleted by most actions, preventing run jabs from being an infinite and certain combos from being too long. Special moves would change character utility and let you use characters a bit differently to each other, but fundamentally, run jabs and aggressive rushdown was the bread and butter of Ultimate MK3, as is the same thing with Trilogy. It's fast and furious. Now, that's the super fast version of it, but I really want to focus on the stuff that Trilogy did differently, on top of the new additions to the game in general. We've already established that Trilogy is similar to UMK3 in almost every way mechanically, but here is what was changed or added. Aggressor is one of the more significant additions to Trilogy, a brand new mechanic that appears for each player. Connecting hits with the opponent builds this gauge. When it fills all the way to the top, it triggers automatically and it gives you a damage boost. Some think that you can get a speed boost from this, but you actually don't. The motion lines that track behind you may give the illusion of speed, but it very much is just a damage boost mechanic. As the name suggests, it rewards aggressive play. Blocked hits build the gauge faster than actual hits, and it's not based on damage dealt. Connecting hits will build a set amount, and blocked hits build a set amount as well. It's not something that you majorly need to think about because it builds constantly and triggers by itself, but it can create short bursts of momentum for the player using it. Worth mentioning, Aggressor is for the most part banned in any competitive play. Up next is the expanded roster. As you may have noticed throughout this video, or maybe you remember from back in the day, this game introduced fully playable versions of certain characters, and it's time to go through them. Rain was fully realized in Trilogy. Although he and Noob Saibot would be first playable on the 16-bit ports of Ultimate MK3, we had a much more close to arcade look for both of these characters. Rain had a wicked moveset. The Weather Ball, which could control opponents and set them up for juggles, Lightning Strike, which creates a massive blast on top of the opponent, once again setting up for juggles, and the Super Kick, which was simply performed by the back high kick roundhouse input. Only Rain's will send them across the screen and once more allow for a juggle. Rain was top tier in Trilogy because on top of his excellent combo damage, launching options and amazing low crushing combo string in high kick, low kick, roundhouse, his super kick was an infinite if juggled correctly. I'll get into the details of that later on. There was also a really weird thing where if he connected a weather ball, he could connect up to 4 of them if he used it by itself, allowing for massive damage for basic timing really. When people talk about the brokenness of Trilogy, they're usually referring to Noob Saibot. This character, like Rain, made his return from 16-bit in this game and kept his busted moveset as well. Not only did Noob Saibot have incredible launching possibilities in both his dialer combos and special moves in the form of Clone Lunge and Teleport, his projectile would be the most broke move yet in all of classic Mortal Kombat, the Disabler. This move would disable the opponent's ability to block, and on top of that, they were completely unable to land hits in this state as well. Although their attack animations do come out, nothing happens. His special moves collectively led to massive infinites. If he touched you one time, you were probably dead if he hit you at any moment. Noob Saibot was one of the first ever Mortal Kombat characters to be so infamous that soft bans would apply in some tournaments. Others would ban him outright. A personal favourite of mine, Chameleon, was finally playable for the first time as a secret character. Pick any male ninja, and while the game loads in, hold back, high punch, high kick, run and block, all together. As the round starts, voila! Chameleon appears with a slightly transparent visual effect and, of course, his gameplay mechanic, which was that every few seconds, he'd transform randomly into one of the ninja characters. If you had the timing of the transition down, you could stay as the ninja in question for another cycle, so long as your active frames of a special move were active right as the transition begins. At least that's what I discovered anyway. It's been hard to find a lot of information on Chameleon in all honesty. I'm going to assume the active frames keeping you from transitioning has something to do with preventing a game crash if the game tries to change ninja with a move they don't normally do being out there, but I'm not sure. It is exceptionally common in moves that only specific ninjas have. Chameleon may have the chance of becoming two soft-banned characters in Noob Saibot and Rain, but he becomes them for such a short amount of time, and the player such little time to adapt, that he was never really banned in America. The short time limit was seen as pretty balanced. Female Chameleon would replace the male version for the N64 as a console exclusive. This version alternates between Melina, Jade, and Kitana. Raiden returns, but because he wasn't playable in Mortal Kombat 3 or Ultimate, his MK2 sprites would be used. His moves are all there from MK2 as well, but a new running animation and dialer combos would be given. He did gain a new move with the ability to shoot a lightning bolt across the other side of the screen, and it appears behind the opponent. His strings in general were kinda simple. This 4-hit launcher, for example. This may be just 4 uppercut animations in a row, but functionally, it's a very good launcher. Johnny Cage returns, but due to ongoing disputes that motion capture actor Daniel Pesina had with Midway at the time, Pesina was replaced by a different actor, Chris Alexander. He had all of his moves, Force Balls, Shadow Kick, and Red Shadow Kick, which did less damage but went further, and Shadow Uppercut. Only thing he lacked was Nut Punch, which I can only assume is so they didn't have to make a new animation for everyone in the game who got hit by it. String-wise, he was also as expected. A launching string, and a kick string. Baraka has some pretty standard new strings, and once again his MK2 special moves in Blade Spark and Chop Chop, but in Trilogy he has a new move. Blade Spin, which involves forward down forward and then the block button, pressing it repeatedly to spin for longer. It's a really strange move, but kind of hilarious. Rumour has it the Blade Spin was originally going to be a move in MK2, but I honestly can't remember where I saw or heard that, so take it with a pinch of salt. The PS1, Saturn, and PC version of this game had some extra content that the N64 didn't. First of all, boss characters. All 4 classic bosses were playable in Trilogy, with the exception of old Shang Tsung, but the N64 version only had Shao Kahn and Motaro playable. And even then, they could only be unlocked via a cheat code. The other versions also featured Goro and Kintaro. Bosses would have some new animations for player purposes, such as a jump, but you couldn't really attack from these jumps, so they just felt a bit awkward really. The Aggressor bar would be disabled if you played as boss characters too. There actually isn't much to say about the bosses, believe it or not. They very much are their boss selves with player control. They behave the same way, but the inclusion of launchers and the like made some of the older bosses feel pretty funny to combo against. Motaro, for instance, had some weird juggle state if he was airborne, giving some different combo potential. In the PS1, Saturn, and PC version, players could actually select legacy versions of specific characters. This doesn't apply to every character by any means, but Kano, Raiden, Jax, and Kung Lao can have their alternate version selected if the player presses select while hovering over the icon. Complete with classic fatalities as well, the characters would keep as many of their old moves as possible, but once more with some new additions, and combo strings to fit the UMK3 style. On top of a really funny and easy combo string in high punch 4 times and a low starter, Kano had his Kano Ball and Blade Toss, only they gave him a new move too, which was Blade Spin. This was actually really important because it gave Kano a launcher in Classic as well as UMK3, something pretty important for damage in this game. He has this weird thing where his jabs have less frames on them than other characters, so you can potentially squeeze in more high punches in some of your punishes. Classic Raiden has MK1 Raiden's moves as expected. Strangely, his launcher took a lot longer to recover than a lot of other characters, but you can still combo from it, but it feels very strange indeed. Classic Raiden has this weird thing as well where his crouching low kick has less recovery frames than his crouching high kick, so it can often juggle more than it should, and in some versions, infinite entirely. Jax's previous version is Mortal Kombat 2, and this character is dangerous. He was given an air version of his grounded energy wave, but it keeps the grounded version too. Although there is a slight cooldown on air wave, it works so well in harmony with ground pound on top of that. He's got some decent keep out tools with all of this stuff combined. He does lose the launching corner string that MK3 Jax has, and he loses the dash punch too. It's actually a bit undecided amongst the people I've spoken to that played Trilogy at high level, whether MK2 or 3 Jax is considered better. They're very different. Finally, MK2 Jax's extended grab does significantly more damage than MK3 Jax. I'm talking about a third life. Ouch! Last on this list is Kung Lao. Save the best for last in this case. Both versions of Kung Lao can infinite with their spins and dive kicks. However, MK2 Lao has more pathing for it thanks to a launching combo string, something MK3 Lao doesn't have. This string by itself does tons of damage both on hit and block. One of the strongest moves in the entire game when blocked, in fact. Because of dive kick cancel combos possible in both versions of this character, this launcher leads to a simple 50% damage and beyond. Even without use of infinites and loops, which arguably I'm not very good at, MK2 Lao is pure damage, a very dangerous pick. MK2 Lao for some reason additionally has Raiden Superman, and yes, even the air version. Odd inclusion, but every little helps when you're top tier. One thing Trilogy did with the base UMK3 style is make a few changes to the existing characters. Now, I'm not going to talk about tier lists and stuff here, as character viability was pretty similar across Trilogy and UMK3. Those characters never really changed. Top tier Ultimate MK3 characters were still the same level of good in Trilogy for the most part. Some characters, though, would receive new moves, which allow them to either be played a little bit differently, or just help them in general. Here are some Trilogy-exclusive versions of some of the cast. Starting off with the main man, Sector is much better in Trilogy damage-wise because of one inclusion, the ability to fire a double missile, which is performed with back-back forward low punch. This move alone gives Sector a better ranged game and, importantly, much bigger damage payout, as you can end combos with high punch and double missile. The constant issue that Sector faced back then is that while Smart Missile is on screen, he can't shoot a straight missile until it explodes. There's some kind of weird missile limit system. This would be semi-fixed in some versions of UMK3, where Smart Missile and Straight Missile can be on the screen together if you're player 1, but this missile limit remained in Trilogy PS1. Double Missile really helps damage and range, in some cases giving him above 50% damage for an air teleport or a teleport punish. Nightwolf has a faster version of his shoulder charge. It does less damage than regular charge, but it goes much further. Overall, not seen to be that useful, but any change is always welcomed if it comes with no setback. Additionally, it's been a mechanic since UMK3, but rarely talked about and in some cases not known. When the opponent is in recovery frames of something, or hit stun in other means, Nightwolf's projectiles start up faster. In Trilogy, when a faster startup special comes out because of this mechanic, the attack shines red rather than green. It's not different to UMK3, but it is a new visual indicator. This startup mechanic applies to Sindel's breath and Sector's missile as well. MK3 Kung Lao can move while spinning in Trilogy. Tempest Lao from MKX seems very similar to this, right? Something he couldn't do before. There is also a double teleport, which can mix the opponent up a little bit if they're too comfortable waiting for the regular version. MK2 Lao cannot do the double teleport. Liu Kang has a red bicycle kick as an extra move. It goes further than the normal one. He still keeps the normal one though. Striker gets a double grenade with two different angles. More damage of course, and covers a wider area, but the recovery is way longer. Kano gets given the crazy Kano Ball. If you ever wanted to turn Kano into a living pinball, well, this is your answer apparently. It's ultimately a bizarre set of movement that makes him very hard to predict. There is said to be a few patterns, but ultimately it's a move that you can use when the chips are down and it really freaks out the opponent. Sindel has double breath. Like Sector, it's a great source for extra damage. Simple, but effective. Scorpion suffered a common issue in that he was just a worse version of Human Smoke in Ultimate MK3. Nothing he had was different to Human Smoke, and everything he had was inferior. This changes somewhat in Trilogy because he was given a forward-moving teleport. This is given additionally to regular teleport, and it's a move only he has. Both teleports can be used once in the same combo, allowing for better damage. This has other uses too though. A jump kick can now be confirmed into forward teleport, and it will mostly connect. No longer being position specific like cross-up teleport, every confirmed teleport exists, you can now double the teleport damage. Neutral is a bit weirder too because of the unpredictable mobility, and this to me is one of the better moves in the game because it gives Scorpion identity, something he didn't have before. I didn't highlight this in my Ultimate MK3 video, so allow me to cover it here, as it is a thing in both Ultimate MK3 and Trilogy respectively. Jab cancelling. Jabs can be cancelled out of their recovery animation if you cancel the button into something else. This is most common when the run button is used, but you can press other buttons too. Simply put, input a high punch or low punch, and then immediately input the other button that you wish to press. It cancels out the last few recovery frames, causing this punch to recover quicker. It allows for some custom combos that aren't usually possible, and it makes other basic combos much easier. The example I'll use here is Rain's Roundhouse Infinite. It's only possible for Rain to walk forward and roundhouse after high punch if the high punch is cancelled with something else, using this technique. I use run. This act of high punch up in the air, walk forward and late roundhouse to cover just enough height on the other side to repeat only works because of jab cancelling, otherwise we can't both jab and walk forward with enough time to spare. There's tons of combo examples using this, but Rain's is extremely out there because of the severity of the combo in question. Another thing that exists in both Trilogy and MK3 is the relaunching combos. They exist in Ultimate MK3, but really ran rampant in some versions of Trilogy on a far greater scale. The basics of it is that off specific launches, a perfectly timed jump would connect right as the opponent is about to touch the ground. If you hit the sweet spot, you'll actually get another full jump in. The most notorious example of this in Ultimate MK3 would be masked Sub-Zero, who can rep this quite easily, but in Trilogy, they were everywhere. The difficulty of relaunching combos differed, but fundamentally it gave some characters that already had good damage an even more devastating option. This is another one of those things that I really didn't touch in my UMK3 video, but wouldn't be doing this style of MK true justice without covering eventually. It really was a big deal for some characters. It's worth mentioning that with relaunches in mind, it can be character specific and it can very much be hurtbox specific, and even then, it doesn't have a chance to work 100% of the time for some characters. When it works, it's great. When it doesn't, that's just the way it is. Right, so we've established all of the characters and the basic gameplay itself. Now, I want to go into the Trilogy system. If you've played both Trilogy and UMK3, you've likely always felt that something about Trilogy just feels that little bit different. That's because it is, and it's mostly due to game speed. Arcade Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 runs at 53 frames per second. This is the standard for the game. Now, Trilogy is a game that runs at 60 frames per second. This slight increase in FPS results in a game that runs a tiny bit faster, and why the game automatically feels just that little bit more fast-paced. The game speed, combined with the slightly downgraded graphics and music, shapes the game into a really fun and unique Mortal Kombat experience, but still isn't quite the same as authentic arcade, seen to be the shining golden standard for the time. Many arcade MK enthusiasts to this day tell me of how they never really touched Trilogy because they were arcade players. Anything else just felt weird to them. Remember too that back then, the options for a proper arcade stick for use at home was almost non-existent, so arcade users would be alienated from trying Trilogy due to its console exclusivity. It's not like now when we can just plug a converter in and use whatever we want. In those days, you kinda had to make do with the stuff that the console had readily available. But now, the section that I've really wanted to go over. You'll notice that I haven't talked about the N64 version in this video at all really, except the female chameleon character. I've been saving it till now, because the N64 version has great relevancy when it comes to the MK meta. Believe it or not, the only similarity that the N64 and other versions share with each other is the game's title, because almost everything else is mechanically significantly different. I suppose we'll get the obvious stuff out of the way first. Trilogy on N64 has far inferior graphics and sound. PS1 Trilogy is a downscaled version of arcade, but this is even more in that direction. It's almost like a slightly upgraded version of the 16-bit versions of UMK3. There's less colors, in turn resulting in less visual detail, and there's so much compressed audio that everything just sounds fuzzy, the opposite of PS1 Trilogy. And the music? The less said about that, the better. Here's a comparison. But that's just the obvious stuff. The stuff you'll already know if you grew up with this version of the game. Even with these extreme downgrades, certain competitive scenes and players actually preferred and prefer to this day the N64 version, and that is for a few mechanical reasons. First of all, a new game mode. I hadn't mentioned this in the mode portion way back at the start of this video because it's greatly significant to the N64 specifically, and it is an exclusive mode. 3 versus 3 combat. 3v3 acts just like 2v2, only it adds another character. Because the old school communities love these multiple character modes, 3v3 becomes somewhat of a standard that the Trilogy tournaments are played on. There's also the factor that N64 Trilogy faces 0 load time compared to PS1, resulting in a much faster experience in between games overall. The payoff of heavily compressed design thanks to the cartridge instead of disc meant that at the very least, load time wasn't a factor, a common benefit of the N64 console. It's always said that due to the downsizing required to run MK Trilogy for N64, it resulted in resolution differences, which in turn makes the game feel a little bit more closed in. The characters almost seem slightly bigger on the screen than PS1 because of it. It makes specific characters and combos feel drastically different to boot. Rain's Infinite, for instance, is miles easier to perform on the N64 version of the game, because his Infinite is so heavily focused on where you are on the screen when Roundhouse connects, you kind of have to be roughly in the middle of the screen to make sure that Rain can turn around in time, and I feel like that position is way more lenient on the N64 due to the screen size. There's also the factor of speed. A common misconception is that N64 Trilogy is miles faster, but this isn't necessarily true. There is a bizarre, almost frame-skipping feature that N64 Trilogy has, which gives it, on occasion, a rather inconsistent frame rate. It feels a little bit more like the game is struggling to run, or chugging in general. At times, it looks and feels way faster than PS1, and in other instances, it's extremely choppy. The inconsistency of the FPS makes some players believe it to be faster, but on average, it's actually the PS1 version that's faster more often than not. Going back to Rain's Infinite, you feel like you have more time on the N64 thanks to the speed, another thing that makes certain combos hard to perform in the PS1 version, execution-wise. On the subject of execution, here's a really weird one. Teleports had less cooldown on N64 Trilogy. Because of this feature, some really wacky combos with specific characters become possible. Outside of combos, the teleport still creates this really strange neutral where, I mean, bloody hell, just look at it. Buttons were drastically different in frames, to the point where Trilogy has a different meta layer entirely compared to UMK3. Individual buttons like the high and low kicks sport significantly faster recovery, which means you can actually poke with them in a way that you couldn't in previous trilogies or MK3 in general. Sweeps were more plus on hit, which gives you guaranteed offense. Crouched high kicks, while useless in UMK3, were pumped up in Trilogy to where they functioned as almost universal anti-airs. Not everyone had a decent crouched high kick, so it wouldn't always function the same way, but for a lot of characters, they hit great to anti-air to begin with, and then they recover fast enough that you can combo with a follow-up too. But now, crouching pokes are often plus when connecting with the opponent, which means that if you hit one of the crouched attacks, you kind of get free reign to move in and start your own offense. This is a huge change, and it makes the run jab rushdown player have to think twice when going in. These changes make Trilogy a bit more varied. If someone's run jabbing, you hit them with a crouched poke and gain advantage, and now you can do the exact same thing in return. Very different to Ultimate MK3 for sure. But now let's talk about characters too. I mentioned earlier that N64 Trilogy had less boss characters, but that's not all. And even then, the characters that existed in the game had some slight changes as well. Besides the fact that Rain and Noob felt a little bit different in general, I'm not going to cover every character here, just a few key examples that demonstrate the base differences. Sector was actually a better version of himself on the N64. That strange bug I mentioned, where Smart Missile and Straight Missile couldn't be on the screen together, isn't a thing on this console. Sector is able to Smart Missile and then use either single or double while the Smart Missile is active. I'd go as far to say as Trilogy N64 Sector could very well be the best version of the character in classic Mortal Kombat. He has the relaunch combo possibilities, the extra damage thanks to the double missile, and in this version, he doesn't suffer from the missile limit. Combine all of these together, and you pretty much have a very dangerous character compared to his other versions. Teleport characters immediately become more useful with the changes to teleport cooldown that I mentioned before, and no need to use specific examples here, but remember, Human Smoke, Scorpion, and Ermac all have a teleport in the same style. Crouched high kicks were broken on N64, with some characters they led to infinites. Shiva is a notorious example because of her crouched high kick easily juggling an opponent and recovers super fast. Zero corner pushback on this move as well meant that after any launch that Shiva had you in, you were done. It was a good anti-air, but the infinite is what people remember. This existed in small cases for some characters in other versions like MK1 Raiden or MK3 Shang and Jax, but N64 Shiva will always kind of remain the main example that people remember. The last example I want to focus on is Sub-Zero. Not usually a character that you'd think about, but trust me on this one. In other versions of Trilogy, masked and unmasked Sub-Zero are actually two separate characters, and there's a reason for that. Their move lists are split between the two characters to balance it out. In N64, unmasked Sub-Zero doesn't exist, but the masked version does. Instead of keeping masked as is, they, for some reason, gave him the specials of unmasked plus all of his masked Sub-Zero moves, while retaining the combo strings of the masked version, which includes a launcher. This version of Sub-Zero has straight freeze, ground freeze, air freeze, and ice clone all in one character. This has a huge amount of knock-on effects that make this character arguably the strongest version of Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat history. Because of these specials, masked Sub-Zero can do things that he usually couldn't. For example, ground freeze had a short stun time usually, but grounded the opponent if you punished them in the air. You're actually able to air freeze and combo into it from the ground freeze. Because they're not frozen, double ice backfire never applies, allowing for a much longer stun duration. On top of corner carry, you can get a free neutral jump kick into his launcher string, taking his base damage and making it significantly higher. After doing about 40% damage easily, end a combo and air freeze, and it sticks the opponent in place. The ultimate setup move that can chain your offense all over again. Every freeze leads to crazy damage, and if the ground freeze hits, you're in a terrible position as the defender because of his other freezing options. To say this character is nuts is a huge understatement. Another example of N64 mayhem. When it comes to community, Trilogy is somewhat of a hybrid. If you knew how to play Ultimate MK3, you by default already knew how to play Trilogy, even if you'd never touched it before. This in turn meant that if you went to a classic event at any moment for a UMK3 tournament and Trilogy was playable also, you by all means could get involved in that too. Even without knowing the smaller details, you'd probably be fine. At this stage, it was somewhat of a seesaw effect with Mortal Kombat during this time frame. You see, as I mentioned earlier about arcade players sometimes giving this game a miss and not visiting it until years later, it did have some smaller knock-on effects. Trilogy being a console-exclusive title was an indication that serious Mortal Kombat could now exist in a console space. Even with the downgrades the game had to undertake to be playable on home systems, but at the same time, it was somewhat of a sign that arcade-era Mortal Kombat was about to become no longer the only way to experience competitive Mortal Kombat, because this entire new version was only reachable on home systems in the first place. Trilogy was, for the most part, a side event game. UMK3 would be the main event, or at the least, the game people attended the tournament for as their main focus, and Trilogy would be there so players could enter that as well, really. You can find a lot of competitive footage at classic MK gatherings. If it's America, once again, the Combat Network team would host events, and sometimes Trilogy would be quite the focus. Mainstay names like Rio and Shock would be common tournament attendees, 999 Phil, and more. Pretty much all the people that you may have remembered from Ultimate MK3. There is a yearly classic MK tournament in Ohio that features many old MK titles, Trilogy once more being a mainstay game out there, but the main community I want to focus on in this video lies in South America. South America has a surprisingly large and very dedicated Ultimate MK3 community that spans different territories and includes a lot of talented players, even in 2019. I had the chance to speak with Brazilian player By Speed, also known as Canal By Speed on YouTube. He is a really big content creator in that part of the world, and classic MK is his bread and butter. In researching this video, I knew I had to get him on board and pick his brains about specific areas of that community. I didn't cover this community in my Ultimate MK3 video, but always knew it was there. I want to thank him for giving me his time and helping me shine some light on a community that truly keeps classic MK alive. South America still has tournaments to this day, both for Ultimate MK3 and Trilogy. This is where everything I've talked about with arcades and ports and the like changes up some. Arcades existed in South America, sure, but Mortal Kombat arcades were not so regular. For every one Mortal Kombat machine, you'd have 20 to 30 SNK machines for games like King of Fighters. Playing arcade Mortal Kombat in that part of the world was a rarity. But what wasn't was the ease of access to console ports like Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo. Because of the 16-bit versions, South American players could still play MK and grind it more efficiently. It's why, if you go on YouTube and search for any South American Ultimate MK tournament, there's usually a good chance that even now in 2019, the game is played on a Sega Genesis or something, because for the player base, the 16-bit version became the tournament standard. With Trilogy, however, this is where the N64 version of the game truly stood out as a competitive title for the South American scene. I asked Speed why they favoured the N64 console so heavily, and he gave me a few reasons. Remember, this is entirely mechanics and has nothing to do with visuals or sound. This community was developed from home ports, so arcade accuracy wasn't really important. The crouched pokes on N64, sometimes being plus on block and incredibly fast, it combines both of these that makes them wonderful options to interrupt run jab pressure originally created in Ultimate MK3. It's a turn stealer, and it breaks up the constant run jab offense that some players found quite repetitive and tiresome, to be honest. The rushdown meta becomes different when on the N64 version. Trilogy offering players a bit more depth than they would usually find with Ultimate. It's definitely not for everyone, and it is absolutely a different experience. The classic skin versions of characters was something the player base didn't want to deal with. MK2 Lao was quoted quite regularly as being quite the problem character, and N64 not having these mechanics meant the issue was basically removed automatically. They were said to be a little bit buggy and not similar to traditional Ultimate MK characters. The competitive scene would often turn off the Aggressor bar when playing in tournaments. I know I said this earlier on, but it really applies here. You could do this in the options menu, so the damage boost after being aggressive for a bit just doesn't apply. This turns the game into more traditional Mortal Kombat, with the only changes to the game being stuff that you couldn't avoid and would be Trilogy specific. That said, there were talks of a pretty groundbreaking bug on the PS1 version of the game. Something By Speed said to me was certainly significant enough that it made the entire scene jump ship onto the N64 full time. I have to say that not everybody I've spoken to knew of this glitch, but there is video evidence, and it was certainly enough to convince this community to make the console change permanently. When turning off the Aggressor bar, for some reason there was an extremely rare chance that one of the two players in the match would have a permanent damage boost, almost as if Aggressor is on all the time, but only for one player. When this would happen in tournament settings, the match had to be forfeited, the console restarted, or the options reset, and having to do this every single time because of an alleged bug was just frustrating more than anything. And reports seem to show that the N64 version is completely rid of this issue to begin with. This community spans over a fair few territories. Some players compete online using the arcade emulation. Others play offline in their local communities using various consoles, and there are even some players in South America that still play PS1 Trilogy. It's just mostly N64 for the reasons that I've mentioned. If you want to go into specific territories, the Dominican Republic almost exclusively plays Trilogy, Argentina almost exclusively plays UMK3, Chile plays a mix of UMK3 and N64 Trilogy, and then we have Brazil that plays pretty much everything. It truly is a mixed bag of classic action. They've even had some really sizable tournaments and exhibition events. If anyone is interested, I suggest checking out By Speed's YouTube channel, of which I'll link for you in the description. It's fascinating stuff, and the level of play is ridiculously high. And for another time, there goes another episode of the MK Meta. I want to thank everybody that helped me make this video possible because, as always, this video can't exist without the fine folk that answered my questions all the way through during my research period. Trilogy was a really special game for me because of the character variety and close to arcade experience at such a young age. I know a lot of people feel really nostalgic about this one, so I wanted to do this video justice and cover the necessary communities that still compete in it to this day. It's not just the UMK3 clone that some players believe it to be. Trilogy offers so much more than that. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. Share it with your buddies if they love MK, or fighting games in general, and don't forget to check out my other MK Meta episodes that are on the channel too. This is episode 5 at this point, which is crazy. There's still so many more MK games to come. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.